Hey there, everyone. In this episode, we start out with a conversation around the idea of combating hate, and which is a popular reprise that we hear nowadays. And I think we all can harmonize with the emotional desire to improve generalized human relations, both locally and globally. I end up sort of. Criticizing the generalized reprise about combating hate because of what I think I accuse it of committing a domain error, and I think what it actually does is more technically suffer from a type of category confusion. And the reason that I felt necessary to sort of beat this up a little bit is because this type of a category confusion, I think, gets used frequently by the evil rhetoricians that I often mention. So in this conversation, we explore that a little bit, we unfold that a little bit, and we also end up touching on somewhat on Marxism, on materialism, and both of those carry certain implications about the ideas of what it is to be a human and what is the self. And we explore that because the self as a topic, I refer to it as the slippery fish because it's difficult to grasp. It wiggles and is slippery in a way that many of the objects of our philosophical explorations aren't. And that has to do with the fact that everything that we experience, all of our data comes through the self. It comes through consciousness. So when we can't get outside of something, it becomes very difficult to really understand it for what it is. This is sort of the fish in the water problem. It's only when he gets yanked out of the water that he might have an idea that he was in the water. Maybe this is what happens to humans when we die, when we get yanked out of the water. Maybe then we come to understand what was the nature of the water we were immersed in. But so we try to unfold some of those ideas about the self because this, I like to chide some of the common ideas about happiness as being two dimensional, and I think that the our ideas about happiness end up to be intimately connected with our ideas about the self and implications around one carry into implications around the other. So those are the things that we explore in this episode. Sit back and see what you think because while these seem like maybe they're philosophical what would you call it, a philosophical exploration into some random place, it turns out that our ideas about the self are intimately connected with how we see the world and how we operate within it, why we do the things we do, and why we live life the way that we do. So, so we try to unfold a lot of those things as always. And as always, this is not AI. None of it is scripted. Our none of our conversations, whether it's with the co-hosts or with any of the experts that visit us, that honor us by kind of opening their lifetimes of deep thought and exploration. None of our encounters are scripted. So enjoy category confusion and the slippery fish of the self.
Hey, Brian.
Hey, good morning.
So I have a topic and maybe a second one, and I don't know if they tie together. And then you had some musings also. So maybe let's see how this all goes. What I came in with was I keep Mamdani's election has a new kind of spate of this stuff coming up. I keep seeing content over the last several years along the lines of we need to fight hate. And
Mm,
first, that bothered me grammatically because the noun is hatred. So I just kind of get rubbed the wrong way by it. But the
mhm,
more I see it, the more I realize I'm also rubbed the wrong way by um, the premise. that hate can be combated, or that hatred can be combated. And I'm not sure what it is that bothers me about that so much. But it makes me wonder about the roots of hatred. And I think of ignorance, and I think of anger or rage,
Okay.
as two elements that certainly flow into it.
I was going to go fear.
Uh-huh. Yeah. And maybe you can combat that stuff. Ignorance, I assume you can combat with education. Combat might not even be the right word either,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
address.
Right.
Um, Fear and anger, certainly can't be combated in the ways we think about combat, uh, unless we're literally thinking about combat, right? And so, a lot of organizations and individuals talk about, um, standing up to hate and fighting against hate, and it really reminds me of the 5 minutes hate, or the 1 minute hate, whatever it was in 1984. Um,
Uh,
is 1984 a Brave New World? I think it's 1984, where everybody just gets to hate for a minute, and then they get on with their day, and that's a way of kind of diffusing or channeling, emotions that might get in the way of the state's getting done what it wants to get done.
the little daily zozobra.
Right. Um, so yeah, I don't know if the topic is quite, what is the root of hatred, although that's interesting, but also kind of how we think about polarization, right? When we're trying to address,
Mhm.
a deep division between people, maybe an ideological division, or maybe it's even deeper than that.
Yeah.
So that was kind of the general thing I had in mind.
Yeah. I think that there are some, I don't know if it's technically right to say some domain errors in that the general idea that I hear trumpeted like fight hatred. See, my feeling is that things like fighting or having wars on or combating, all those kinds of ideas, I don't my rule of thumb is that if you don't capitalize it, then it's not really something that you can combat or have a war on, or even the positive things. I don't think you can uplift or improve. I think if you can't capitalize it, then we're in a different realm. We're in a general realm. And this kind of touches, which I might have mentioned before in reading Hannah Arendt's On Revolution. She draws a distinction between compassion, which is to a given individual who is capitalizable, right? Bill, Susie, whatever, versus pity, which by her distinction, I'm not saying that everybody uses it this way, but her pity is for like the masses, small m, right? And uh, so I think we had the same problem with the war on poverty, the war on drugs, I don't think that just a non-proper noun you can do those things to. I think you're committing a domain error, and you're thinking that by adjusting the furniture in your head somehow, reality over here necessarily changes. And this is connected to a thought that I've been having that's related to Mamdani in general. And it's related to Hannah Arendt, it's related to the French Revolution versus the American Revolution. And it has to do with the root of it goes all the way back to, say it with me, pesky Descartes, right?
I thought you were going Marcus Aurelius, but okay.
Yeah, yeah. No, I think he's still on the good guy side. But the root of it, I think, is materialism, and that that when one is rooted in a fundamentally materialist worldview, one finds oneself making certain assumptions. And I'm reading now Kropotkin, who is, he says it. We are materialists. We are mechanists. You know, we think that everything we're doing is super scientific. So that's why we feel safe to say, you know, we're on this place of, you know, we're with Darwin and evolution and all of this. And I heard someone else making a critique of Marxism, and they were saying that the big mistake of Marxism was believing in the perfectibility of humans. And I was like, wait a minute here. I believe in the perfectibility of humans, but like that's too vague. We need to drill into the details here, which is what we've been doing over the past 70 plus episodes. And that is to say that the materialist believes that the perfectibility of humans can be attained by changing material circumstances. And with the idea, and Kropotkin makes the argument, of course, that if the material circumstances uh, are correct, that basically his argument is if people have enough, then they're going to be perfected and they're going to operate like perfected beings. That it's that their behavior is purely based on the material circumstances in which they exist, and that with that changing, then who they are completely will change.
Well, I just want to clarify. You're saying, um, from a non-materialist point of view, maybe meaning with integration of the rational and subjective capacities that we have, um, or maybe it's better to say the rational, emotional, spiritual capabilities that we have. Per, per, the perfectibility of humans becomes possible, but surely you're not implying that that utopia is possible. So how do you make that distinction?
Well, I think that there's an interesting parallel here. To leap from the perfectibility of a particular human being after their exertion of a demonstrable and not easily attained amount of effort in a certain direction, uh, believing in that is sort of like believing in the naive causality. Well, I see the, you know, gravity causing the apple to fall from the tree and roll down the hill and da 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 da, to going, okay, the whole universe is now deterministic, and everything, because I can calculate the speed of that apple rolling down the hill. Now, all of reality is deterministic. That's kind of, and I've always called that a religious leap, writing a promissory note that no one will ever cash. They always do. It's a thought experiment. Well, and imagine a machine or imagine a genie. And, you know, through history, there have been various devices that take the leap from because I can follow a simple causal chain. All of reality can break down into just a mess of simple chains. Well, it's the same idea to say that if one person can attain Buddhahood, then that means that we could, you know, theoretically, we could attain a utopic state where everyone is a Buddha. That is I would argue, is the vision of the philosophical anarchist. That obviously, if everybody's a Buddha, we aren't going to need any meter maids. We aren't going to need any police or any district attorneys or any of that stuff to the guardrails that keep humans from going astray. We won't need those externally because those will all have been internalized and all behavior will be harmonious according to the laws. You know, well, that's just the same kind of philosophical promissory note. And people would have every bit as much right to be skeptical of it as I have the right to be skeptical of a deterministic universe just because you can calculate the speed of an apple rolling down a hill, basically. And I know they're much more complicated apples, and you use very sophisticated math to calculate the bumping into the apple into other things and all that. Yeah, 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 yeah. I get it. But still, the leap is there. It's just like those leaps in the great chain of being. You got nothing really. If we're honest, you got nothing. Um, so 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 where does that put us? Um, I guess if we're looking at well, where do you wanna go from here? In the hatred direction or
Well, you said there were a couple of domain errors, and so you pointed out a key one that when we generalize what we're against, meaning that we're not opposed to something that can be capitalized, and that's like a stand-in for precisely identified. So when there's a general thing that we're against, we tend to lose our way. Um, I think there was maybe another domain error you wanted to call out relative to that, but if not, I have another question.
well, I mean, I think that the other problem that I see happening well, maybe let's go to your next question because I have a feeling it's gonna dovetail in later on in the thread. So go ahead.
So, when we were just talking about determinism not being adequate, um, it made me think about. I was having a conversation with somebody yesterday about whether nature plus nurture is MISI. And in case MISI is a foreign acronym, it stands for mutually exclusive, cumulatively exhaustive. So a complete set, right? So
Uh,
nature plus nurture is a complete set. And I guess some of that might come down to how broadly you define nature and nurture. But the
no
thing that might
karma, in
not
other
fit.
words?
What's that?
No karma, in other words?
Well, that's where I was going.
Okay.
So the self might not be completely defined by nature and nurture. Um,
Yeah,
the
yeah.
the the timeless, the mysterious, right? And so, um, yeah, I was curious to hear your take on that. I don't feel complete on the hatred or combating topic, but maybe we'll come back to that.
Yeah, I think that, um, the general topic here might be between generality and particularity. Um, but,
Onion peelings, great.
yeah, 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 a version of that. Because, I think the way that I came upon this was in our conversations with people who've been giving a lot of time at expert levels to the questions of free will and identity. I've been thinking like, well, what's the part that doesn't fit right for me? Why does their shoe rub me and where does it rub and why? And I think that again, it's similar to that problem with Descartes, and that is that they take the I as a given. And I think that that unlike any other thing, there is a fundamental mystery surrounding the I that we can't even how do I say it? I talk about the human compulsion to thingify. And so it that works with, most of the stuff out in the world, even though everything's one grand, monistic, everything's God, yeah, all that. But still, it's okay for me to see that there's a squirrel and it's different than the tree, and that's different than the acorn, and it's okay to do that. But the eye is not to be treated similarly. That's why we have things like this guy showing up and saying, "Oh, did you know there was this whole other part to the eye that y'all don't really, we don't know. It just kind of goes off into the mists, right?" Well, so similarly, you can't talk about free will until you talk about who is the I that's leveraging the free will, right? This guy, and this for those of you who don't remember this episode, this is my little pocket Sigmund Freud. Okay, everybody ought to have one of these, right? Uh, he refers to das Ich. the I, right? Martin Heidegger, who I do not have a little plastic one of, sadly, his whole concept was Dasein, literally being there. And that was his idea for what it is to be an encapsulated human. And part of Heidegger's definition of what it is to be a part of, to be a Dasein, is to wonder what it means to be a Dasein. Is that self-reflective function again, right? And so I don't know that we know self well enough yet to question whether we have free will. And so my answer to the question is my heavy suspicion is that the self is perfectible, which is to say developable, which is also to say that it goes through chapters and it has these life cycle, like that there's a thing there, a course, a Tao to it, if you will. And that free will might be a slider that ramps up as you go along that continuum. And uh so these questions, like, it's kind of like asking, is the fluorescent light on or off? And the answer is yes.
Because it's oscillating, you mean?
Because it gives you one appearance, but if you get into the technicality of it, it actually has these other realities going on. And so the answer is really both and neither, and it's interesting because when I mean, Ibn al-Arabi and some of the Kabbalists and people will get us to the same place, but back in Platonic philosophy, there's one of the famous dialogues is him with an older character who's sort of presented to be wiser than Socrates. Hold down your chair, right? And they end up, it's called the Parmenides, and they end up at the end of the Parmenides with this wonderful conclusion where Socrates says, still with the flavor of a certain puzzlement, so then you're saying to Parmenides, so then you're saying that the one both is and is not both the same and not the same as itself. And which is like, is there a more fundamental paradox or dichotomy that you could come up with? And Parmenides is like, bullseye, you got it, great. I'm glad we got this settled, and now we can go on. And if you read some of the translations, there's one I think I read from Harvard, and some of the notes, one of them says, no one really knows what this means because right? Well, now if you've been a devoted listener to the Fools and Sages up to this point, you may be able to surmise what that means. And the clue is from a few episodes back when we talked about Ibn al-Arabi and the connection to the Neoplatonists, who were very into this idea of the one, and you're familiar with this idea of monism. And then you see Ibn al-Arabi coming up with a model of creation that says that there's this absolute creative force, but then it spits out this thing that is known as reality. And so you have things like saying, well, God hides himself with himself because there's nothing but God, but there is the separation. So the one both is and is not the same, and appears both to be the same and not the same as itself because it's playing that, right? Of course. Great. All right. So now you just saved a bunch of money at Harvard. You now understand the Parmenides. And if you didn't quite get that, there's just 70 episodes, go back and it'll all tie in
The
because it
self
does
is a
all tie in.
fortune cookie. The self is a fortune cookie is an earlier episode that
Yep.
touches on that too,
Mhm. And so and
on the micro
so
version.
right, right. And so that the fundamental mystery of what is the self, we've also referred to. People go out and search for God, and what they find is themselves. And they find themselves in the way of God initially because it's their lower impulses that pull them, their creatureness that pulls them away from the higher dimensions. But then this phenomenon that God hides himself with himself means that there's something there that you can't, it's not all bathwater. There's some baby in there too, right? And so, the way that I've been thinking about this is, okay, there is the you that says, I'm going to the 7-Eleven now, where are my car keys? I'm going, and there's the you that predicates all these things in your head that, for want of a better term, we could call the surface consciousness. The I that, for the most part, says I when I say I'm going to the store. But it maybe you need to be old, or maybe you just need time and experience or reflection, but you will, over lifetime, you will get a sense that there is a aspect to you that is deeper than that. That is like a thread that runs through that in a pervasive way that does influence what fits you and what doesn't fit you. And that you can't entirely put your finger on. The Zen people say, "What was your face before you were born?" Right? Or, "What was your face before your mother and father met?" Like that. And that certainly implies that there's more than nature plus nurture. That this is probably not the first chapter of the story. But the conundrum here is that this is another version of the mind-body problem. You're only gonna experience any relevant information about this on the level of mind, and so you're never gonna be able to prove any of this in an objective way, right? Remembering that objectivity is subjective. Like the Woody Allen movie, right? Um, so so yeah, I mean, the self is a slippery fish, and the creation of the universe is a slippery fish, and lo and behold, that's one of the reasons, like the founder of Sufism, he was considered to be a heretic because he said, "I am truth." And that's one of the names of God, is the truth, right? And because he had realized this dynamic of God hiding himself with himself, and the way the Hindus say it, Alan Watts breaks this down in his book, The Joyous Cosmology, is, God breaking itself up into a million little pieces, and then everything eventually slowly all the way making itself back to discovering that it's all just God in the first place. And that's one day of Brahma. And that takes a bazillion, dezillion plus years before that happens. And so so yeah, there are these questions of the fundamental mystery of what is the I, and the basic argument that I would make is that, and one of the other philosophers we talked about said that, Kant was famous for the division between the noumenal world and the phenomenal world. The phenomenal world is what we see, the impact the thing has on us. And Kant said we can't really ever get to the thing it's in itself, which he called the noumena. And we have no knowledge of the noumena. We only know what it's as a phenomena as it impacts us. And someone came along later and said, well, that's technically not true, because the thing we do have noumenal knowledge of, the thing that we can know in itself, is ourself. But obviously, we can't go about that in a phenomenal way. That is, you're not going to understand the nature of yourself just by staring in the mirror. Although I've heard that actually, but that it takes about 2 hours. And that after about 2 hours of staring in the mirror, this is one of these practices to help us pull that nail up. That after about 2 hours of just staring with yourself without getting sidetracked in any way, which itself is an achievement, um, generates some kind of movement, but that it's uncomfortable in a way that makes most people ward off before they get there. So that's
Yeah.
just a fun takeaway. Pro
It
tip.
reminds me of, eye gazing, which is a bizarre practice that one can try in their partnership. Um where you stare into each other's eyes for 5 minutes, or so and kind of see what happens,
So
and
you both scream and run out of the room? Yeah.
that's one outcome, yeah. Maybe a likely one, but, there's, like, all of these gates involved, right? There's, like, the awkwardness and vulnerability
Uh,
and that layer of stuff, but then there's, you can kinda trip out, and I've had the experience of seeing my partner as an old woman and as a baby and, all kinds of stuff, like, actually, um,
right,
near hallucinating.
right.
So
I was gonna say, I've seen that in ceremonies,
yeah,
seeing the whole, vector.
right, yeah.
Yeah, the
I think
biovector.
yeah, I think that's um, probably not an uncommon experience in ceremonies, and
Mhm.
having that experience of oneself also. Um, so Uh, I think I want to circle back because you were talking about Hannah Arendt and revolution and the distinction between compassion and pity. And then you went to Kropotkin and Marx
And materialism,
and materialism. Um,
right.
but I think there was a point there that might have gotten lost that I want to try to
There were a
pull
few
back
threads
out
there. Yeah,
um, about uh, the problem of generalizing or the difficulty between the general and the particular that
right,
people
right.
seem to run into a lot.
Right. Well, we've actually whipped that horse a few times because this shows up in, as I often refer to, in the law, in that we have a written law and then we have case law, and we go to courts all the way up to Supreme Courts, which we're trying to get the smartest people that we can find and the most objective and neutral people that we can find, and we're trying to put them in a setting where they're immune to all the kind of normal wankages that bias a person one way or the other, because we know that this is a judgment that requires a certain purity of the human soul to be able to plumb. And that is that going between the specific and the general. And so that's a tip off there of how tricky this is. We dress them different. We built a huge building out of stones for them to do this in. We write down every little word that comes out of their deliberations about it. So that means that one does not just skip back and forth across this border glibly, right? That there's actually a science to this territory. And it shows up in every time a mechanic works on your car and it's not working right, and he knows the theory of how a car that works right works, but he's got to hold your car up against that theory, you know, the capitalized car, Bill's car, up against car, right? 19 whatever, I already gave myself away. 2000 whatever, Chevy, generic, this model. Not Bill's or Sally's or Susie's or anybody's, but this principle should apply, and you're going to have to figure out if that's what applies now, right? So my feeling is that slipping between the general and the specific, that sometimes we get taken advantage of by evil rhetoricians when they pull. And here's another general rule: if you can capitalize it, then it's probably okay for you to have an emotional association with it. You should have an emotional association with specific things that are factors in your life. If you can capitalize it, it's okay for you to feel a certain amount of loyalty or emotional attachment to it. But if it's not capitalizable, then someone may be slipping something on you if they're trying to get you emotional about it. And what I'm saying is, and this is her Arendt's distinction between compassion, which is a passion. which is an emotion, which is a feeling for this person in this situation. But it's different when it generalizes into pity, by her distinction, where, and her point was that sometimes pity is really lacking in compassion, right? Which is another way to say that when we're thinking in generalities, sometimes we commit horrific specificities by doing that. And this often shows up as a difference between the letter and the spirit of the law. It's like, well, we we wanted one thing to happen, so we set it up this way, and then that, it turns out, incentivizes this other thing to happen that we didn't realize was going to be the problem. And so, like they I saw this once where somewhere they were trying to get rid of, I don't know, maybe it was alligators, so they were paying a bounty on alligators, and it worked good. It affected the alligator population, and then all the locals started opening alligator farms so that they could get more alligators to sell to the right. And that's this idea that somehow we haven't been specific enough. We've just slapped down this generality, and we haven't looked at how it plugged into this specific situation, because it made sense on the level where we're not capitalizing anything, right? Where we're just talking generalities. And so I think that there's a danger there. I think there's also another danger that I could maybe eulogize a little more also, and that is the danger in general of materialism. And that is, the Marxist applies it to society and says that if a human, this is Kropotkin's argument, if a human is not worried at all about any material needs, then they're going to operate out of their highest moral being, right? Well, here's the thing: Nero, Caligula, never worried about a meal, right? Now, I'm not going to even reference modern, in the past 10-year examples of such things. But this is the basic idea that says that human beings are going to ascend a moral ladder based on either the actions of a third party or just the change of their material circumstances. And I remember the Dalai Lama talking about how he said, I knew as a Buddhist that happiness, fulfillment, contentment won't come from material things. It's a pretty well established Buddhist worldview. He says, but coming from such a poor country and seeing the suffering that poverty causes on people, I couldn't help but think, out of my lived experience, he didn't use that term, of course, that maybe wealth could help people get closer to happiness. And then he confesses, which I love. He confesses to traveling to California to do Dalai Lama business and staying in people's homes and peeking into their medicine cabinets in their bathrooms and seeing all the prescription meds for psychiatric conditions of imbalance and unhappiness. That these people had literally every material benefit, but happiness somehow remained elusive. And that's because of the materialist idea that if we just, and we saw the same thing there are people, for example, involved in the ayahuasca traditions that believe that the matter of the medicine is the thing that creates the change. That it has nothing to do with the ceremony, it has nothing to do with the consciousness or the expertise of the maestro or the intention of the maestro, none of that. That's all superstitious stuff because we're so smart now. You're not smart, you're just a materialist. That just means that you only see stuff that hits you in the face. That doesn't mean, that means you've developed no subtlety, or you've sworn off subtlety because you only want things you can measure with a machine. And it turns out a lot of human life is not measurable by a machine. A lot of the places where meaning lives isn't measurable by machine. And the things that influence human development And that's why I'm always kind of pushing back against the conversation of happiness. And I'm saying, "Oh, happiness, is not what it's cracked up to be," right? And I'm not trying to be Schopenhauerian or anything like that, just to be a grump or
Crotchety.
something, crotchety, right? Get off of my lawn, No, because to me it's two dimensional, and who you are on the deepest level is not two dimensional. So yeah, there's a type of fulfillment that's deeper and longer lasting and more cosmic and sparkly than just happiness, unless you have a very upped definition of happiness. But if you're a materialist and you're talking about happiness, as any typically nowadays any scientist talking about happiness is going to be, then um, yeah, you've sort of defined things before, you're not going to find anything that's not material. And so you're going to find this to be a very slippery fish, or you're going to have to define happiness in a whoever dies with the most toys wins type of dimension, right? But if you're talking about, okay, let's see, was Giordano Bruno happy or not when they burned him at the stake? Or was Socrates, when he drank his hemlock, was he happy or not? And I think both of them would argue, that's not really the point. I'm busy Socrates in here, man. Don't bring me down with this, hedonistic kind of little self kind of thing, Uh, Martin Luther King, right? If you were to call him up from the grave and say, dude, all you got to do is recant all that stuff, forget about standing on principle, and you'll live into an old age, and nobody will be having any grief around you, and you just can go off. You think he would go for that? I think he would say, bring it, bring on the bullet, bro. I'm standing for something here, right? And that's what they say. If you don't stand for something, you'll fall for anything. And that's that idea of you'll get your emotion hooked in without going from the general to the specific,
Y-
right?
you said something earlier that just came back around again in a new way, which was not only can you not combat something that's generalized, you also shouldn't be loyal to it. And one of the things I've been thinking about lately is, that our loyalty to people is fraught, right? People are flawed, right? Maybe they're perfectible, but I haven't met a perfect one, right? And so being loyal to people is problematic. But I do think that being loyal to principles is meritorious as long as you're willing to update your model when you realize your principles might be in conflict or are not as fundamental as you thought they were or whatever. So am I making a domain error there in thinking loyalty to principles is valuable?
Well, I guess I think I guess it depends on exactly how that translates and what kind of loyalty we're thinking about here. If your loyalty to principle translates to loyalty in practice, in other words, if your generality is actually correctly applied in practice, then it's fine. But the situations where the problem always occurs, if pity was always compassionate, then we would never have to talk about it. Um, so, and I guess maybe that has to do with your picking your principles very carefully and picking them for yourself and not having other people pick them for you. Um,
The way I've been thinking about principles since we did that episode with Michael Wolff is that principles are fragments of God, right? Principles are the names of God or the faces of God, at least the worthwhile ones. And so, choosing honesty and integrity and whatever
sure.
as core values for an individual or an organization is useful, but one shouldn't mistake that for the fundamental principle, um, which I think is nameless. Um,
Well, and I think that maybe the distinction there is that that we really need to see the ball all the way into the goal. That you need to um, see that the principle that you're applying is actually holding through all the way through the application.
well,
That your
I'm
pity isn't
talking.
without compassion, right? That you're because while the principles are true, everybody's application of them is not typically. And that's where the rub comes in, right? So I guess my feeling is that these generalities um, um, they're fine as far as they go. But it's the human actually applying them is where the problem comes in. And
Let's do a little.
so not that you shouldn't be loyal to good principles, but that loyalty to the good principles, if it doesn't translate across to your phronesis, is like sending thoughts and prayers,
Well, loyalty, I'm assuming, is expressed in action. So, I mean, that's
which means mastering both realms and the transition from the one to the other.
from the
And
internal
so
to the external.
from the non-capitalized to the capitalized.
So that's the little thought experiment.
Maybe that's the distinction,
That
is that it's when the non-capitalized is completely divorced from the application in reality
I
that we
think
see it
I
go
think
wrong.
that makes sense, and it's esoteric. So I want to push for more examples of
Mhm.
your pity containing compassion. What's a parallel idea to that people can get
Oh,
some
oh,
grasp of?
uh, for example, I am someone who believes that we should actually exert a certain amount of control and oversight into migration into our country on the principal level. And I'm also someone that has given a place, one of my, a building on my land for immigrants who came from another country to help them make a start in the United States. So, so I feel like that's something that I see both sides of that conversation. I've participated on both sides of that conversation,
But I'm
which
not
means that
sure
I can,
you're violating a principle there. The
well, I'm not violating one, but I'm applying the moving from a general to moving to a specific and understanding why there are hurdles to going from one to the other. That's kind of my point. And that maybe it's when the non-capitalized things get divorced from all specifics, right?
so I'm thinking of let's say a credo, or is maybe creed is the right word, that um you should always try to speak the truth, and kind of let the chips fall where they may. And that doesn't mean that there might not be some nuance to that. But if you find yourself lying to get by, um, you're doing yourself and external reality a disservice. So a
Right.
principle might be try to err on the side of truth, right? Um,
Yeah.
and to
And
your
to
point,
understand how it applies in this specific situation.
mhm.
And I think Krishnan maybe gave us an example of that. He says, when someone's young and they come at you, you might be encouraging, even though you know that they're not going to be successful, but you want them to try and you want them to get their wings dried out a little bit. And, and he says, whereas if the same person came with the same question and they were 35, you would talk to them very different. You say, hey, bro, you got to wake up.
Mhm.
It isn't that we were lying to the first one. It's that you're actually trying to see the ball all the way into the goal. You're trying to understand the spirit of the law, not just the word, and you're trying to see the right thing happen as you understand it. And that's that bridge from Sophia to phronesis. Sophia is the rule. It's good to never lie. Phronesis is, here is the prisoner and they're going to shoot him or not shoot him. What do I do? So so I think that it's bridging back and forth, and maybe the real point isn't that you don't want to give your loyalty to things that aren't capitalizable, but that it's when the non-capitalizable things are severed from any particular connection that you can trace back and see that it's actually what it purports to be, then you should have some flashing red lights on the dashboard. Like, for example, just writing blank checks for the war on drugs, that might not be nuanced enough. We need to see all the way and how and my feeling is that this is one of the tricks of evil rhetoricians, is generalization and leaving out the details. And so maybe that's the thing, rather than just say that, if it's not capitalizable, although the real big principles we tend to capitalize, like justice and honesty,
Intuitively,
and
yeah.
yeah, intuitively, exactly. And so no, I think that I guess the point is that you need to bring consciousness into that. That's why we need the judge. That's why AI will never really replace the human in that case, I hope. Right? I mean, the AI maybe could look at both sides of the case, but the human has to look in from human to human. And then, but most importantly, that human looking in has to have a certain type of, like the phenomenologists call bracketing, right? Apoke. They have to be looking not through the eyes of the person with their foot nailed down, but sort of through the eyes of the more generalized, idealized, neutral, objective, even though we know that's just like this fantasy term, as close to that as they can be. And we know that there's some purity of the human attention and pursuit that's necessary to get that to happen at the highest likelihood. Um, and so, uh, I mean, I think that the same mistake of the materialist, two-dimensional reductionist thing happens when people think about themselves too. Because if they tend to think of their own progress only in externalized terms, then they're not likely to be on a pathway like Confucius's trail to becoming Chunsu, or Aristotle's trail to the good life, or like that there needs to be a certain awareness that goes on to uh, this idea of, we talk about a lot about the hermeneutic circle. And in the official process of hermeneutics, one of the things that they often try to do is, before they even go into the thing, they want to identify the ways they're likely to misinterpret. Werner Erhard used to call this identifying your thrownness. Knowing I have my foot nailed down, I have this compulsion to want to see things through this filter, and knowing that I'm going to put that into the formula when I calculate my final result. And which is, again, this is another form of consciousness, conscious of consciousness, and actually adjusting itself in awareness of itself. You know, and a lot of that implies that there are different ways to run the human soul, that there are different attitudes that one can have towards one's own development. And that's very closely tied with this idea of free will
That's where I
and
was
the
gonna
expression.
go.
in the
Because it
expression
seems
of
to me,
self and what is self.
yeah, it seems to me that the people who argue that free will doesn't exist but still experience meaning in their lives have to do some mental gymnastics along the lines of um, the experience of meaning is somehow an evolutionary necessity. It doesn't actually have intrinsic value. I feel satisfied by it in a superficial way, but I engage in it because that's my
Right.
deterministic um, process that I just have to go through because I'm a human being. So I have to experience meaning. So I'm going to have this interesting conversation. And because I find it interesting and experience meaning, um, I, I, um,
I'll reproduce.
I don't kill myself and I reproduce.
Yeah.
Um,
That's clearly a materialist view.
but I can't come up with a steel man. I know that's a straw man, but I don't know how Sam Harris would argue back that meaning is actually more meaningful than that, and yet free will doesn't exist.
Right,
Can you
right.
steel man
Well,
that any better?
I don't think I can because I've sort of devoted my life to seeing the clues that debunk that, you know? And so it's because my immediate thought is, well, that there's a difference between negative evolution and positive evolution.
Say more.
Well, negative evolution is just killing all the mistakes, killing off all the mistakes, and what's left is positive.
Mhm.
But that doesn't account for the eyeballs popping out once you've eradicated the gene,
There are
right?
arguments. Uh, yeah,
Um,
I think Dawkins wrote a book about that, and I'm not
yeah,
thrilled with him as as someone to comment on the subjective, but I
right.
think he did write a book about how the eyeball example is not
Is
a
not a
valid
valid
one.
one.
But
Right. Well, the
your
reason
point
that
is
he had to
taken.
address it is because it was an argument that was leveled at that viewpoint over 100 years ago, of course, by Bergson. And, I think that his argument has been beefed up since then, because basically the argument is that order emerges. And, his argument is also that it is our human impulse to increase order as an expression of consciousness, of the consciousness of the universe expressing itself in a way to increase order in certain places in a way that balances all the entropy. In fact, the entropy may be what fuels all that order. I don't know. Right. But or the off gassing of what produces that order, or, the wood chips, if you will. Um, but so uh, and to me, this ties with both personal experience and the insights of other philosophers. Husserl talks about this intentionality as consciousness reaching out into the world. You see that with your baby. I see that with the puppies. I felt that when and can remember being pre-verbal and having language as the means to reach out into the world clearly, but I didn't have it. And the frustration behind that, because my impulse was to reach out into the world, my personal impulse. And okay, maybe I didn't have free will because the creator created that. When you see how this should have the familiar flavor of tail chasing as soon as arguments
Yeah, I
like
mean, I
that
think the
come
counter
up.
argument for um, the the innate qualities of hope, purpose, and will existing independent of nurture. You can make that an evolutionary argument that we wouldn't have come this far if that weren't the case. But there's a deeper, like, where the reason I keep going to meaning as part of the argument against determinism relating to free will is because if 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 our experience of meaning is interpreted as like a happy accident,
Right.
then how could it really be meaning? And why would we still engage in it? That's where I keep getting hung up. And there's a
Well, and here's the other thing. Why is nature evolving consciousness? It can't be just to get fed. That's my personal
and your example for
opinion
that
on
is
things.
Beethoven's Fifth, basically.
And everything else that isn't on your way to the restaurant,
Yeah, or the bathroom.
basically. Yeah. And as soon as we took um as soon as we took certain developmental steps, it feels like that was the tip off that this is a vehicle to something and not the end in itself. And I'm not sure that we have to end up in a completely teleological place. Telos in Greek means like a destination or an end. So teleological means that nature is all moving towards some point. What Teilhard de Chardin called the omega point, as in the alphas at the beginning and the omega points at the end. Or I think certain Christian traditions and certainly Terence McKenna, for Terence McKenna fans, he referred to the eschaton
And a lot of
as
mythology refers to a reckoning, right?
childhood's
Revelation,
end,
Ragnarok.
Arthur C. Clarke. Yeah, all
Yeah,
that with the idea that things are going somewhere. And and that's why I often will ask our guests,
but go
are we
back
going
to you.
somewhere or are we going around in circles?
But you were about to say, I think, that that might not be an either or. That
It
telos
may not
might
be. Yeah.
might mirror this yin will, yang will kind of confusion, or that confusion's not the right word, but ambiguity.
Well, yeah, it feels like we could be experiencing a dimensional effect. That is, it looks that way from our seat because we're here in a meat suit.
Telos looks like it does.
Yeah, or our understanding of causality and intentionality might just be too low dimensional.
Yeah, or time itself. Yeah.
Yeah, all that there's just some dimensional problems to us asking and answering that question in the same language that we go to the store with, and that it doesn't think that way. Maybe that's why we need to, again, the formula in chapter 1 of the Tao Te Ching, and that's that distinction between viewing life with passion, viewing life without passion, or in Spinoza, viewing life subspecie eternitatis or subspecie. What was the other one? It had to do with rationatus, maybe, or I think it had to do with measurability. Durationis, duration. So you have duration and you have eternity, and those are, and that's also we've jumped in back and forth across this. That's the contingent world and the ideal world, right? And here we are with bodies with a contingent world, but this idea of logos or consciousness is this little drip of the infinite, the ineffable, the timeless, that is the the aperture that awareness comes through, which is creates that hard problem of consciousness because that's where subjectivity comes through. It's that one hole poked in the can lid where where that awareness can go beyond the contingent,
Mm,
and when I say contingent, this idea of a world of causes and conditions, that X is contingent upon the things that caused it, and it's also contingent upon the non presence or action of the things that would
prevented it.
dissolve it.
Yeah.
Yeah, or prevent it or would erase it. And so it's in this world getting bumped into by all these other things. And without it only exists within that milieu and as your body. It was caused by your parents, and when the causes and conditions that cause you to be, like your liver functioning, your heart functioning, you're getting food, all that, when those causes and conditions stop, then you're out of here. But this argument, is there a soul? What is the I? What is the nature of subjective consciousness? The Buddha saying that the seed of enlightenment is a turning around in the deep seat of awareness, right? So that's a pretty big clue right there, that it's looking into the I. Ramana Maharishi from the Vedanta, Advaita Vedanta, said, you can become enlightened by asking yourself, who am I? It's the same question, right? And here we have again God hiding himself with himself, right? So so yeah, there's a lot of interesting things going on there. And this idea of the self is a kind of an onion peeling situation where the very core of it is is something that's different than the I that says that I'm going to go to the grocery store now. And I think that just that question, which is like the Buddhist koan, what was your face before your mother and father were born? There's something there, and, that's there's I think there's more fruit there than a lot of other things we give a lot of time and attention to. So, pro tip.
Hmm.
Philosopher's pro tip.
DIY homework. Yep.
Exactly.
Go stare in the mirror for 2 hours.
Yep, and then leave your results in the comments.
Yeah. Cool. Well,
We
good to see
probably
you,
need a
Brian.
warning there too.
Yeah, a disclaimer at least
Disclaimer says that, if it seems like it's going hard, then back off,
at your own
pump
risk.
the
Yeah.
brakes. Yeah.
Yeah. Cool.
Yeah, very good.
Thank you. And yeah, look forward to seeing you soon.
Okay, yeah, everybody punch those likes. I know you're wearing it out, but give it a few more.
Tell your friends.
Tell your friends, leave us a comment, and to the folks that have been commenting, we appreciate it. We really do appreciate it. And to our loyal listeners, we really do, appreciate your sticking with us this long, and especially if you've stayed this far. So very
All
well.
right. Ciao.